Hello everyone and welcome back to the match you've all been waiting for. It is the second day of the match, Magnus Carlsen versus Gukesh. Yesterday they played 2 games, today they will play 2 more, and then tomorrow 2 more, but today every victory is worth more. Every victory today is worth 2 points, and every victory tomorrow will be worth 3 points. So this is the first game we're going to show. It is Magnus Carlsen with white facing Gukesh with black. It's a crazy game. Again, we have a situation where some of you might say the first game is better, some of you might say the second game is better, so I'm going to show both. Let's check it out. Yesterday, Magnus won 1 and 1 was a draw. What will happen today, we will know after we watch this video. So let's check it out. Magnus with white opened with knight to f3. We have pawn to d5 and now pawn to g3. The King's Indian attack is on the board. Pawn to c6, bishop to g2, and bishop to g4. We have pawn to c4 and pawn to e6, transposing into the English opening. Sorry about that, but some sort of a Carlsen version. We have c captures on d5, bishop captures on f3, bishop captures and c captures on d5, castles and knight to c6. Again, all been played before, nothing new here. Many games, thousands of games in the database. We have pawn to d4 and the knight to f6. We have knight to c3, bishop to e7, pawn to e3, and castles kingside. We have bishop to d2, preparing to bring the rook into the game, rook to c8, and queen to e2. We have knight to e8, preparing to shift the knight over to d6 and then to c4 or e4, and the rook f to c1 now. We have knight to d6 and bishop to e1. Queen d7, and now there is a game where pawn to b3 was played. Here we have queen to d1, and it is now as of move 15 that we have a completely new game. And as you can see by the situation on the clock, both of them have pretty much blitzed it out. Magnus even more so, spending only 15 seconds reaching this position. Okay, with increment, let's say a minute, Gukesh maybe some 2 minutes. And Gukesh opts for, well, rook c7, maybe rook c8, doubling up on the c file makes sense, but he goes for pawn to f5. He gains control over e4 and says that he might be interested in attacking Magnus on the king side with some maybe bishop f6, getting maybe the rooks doubled up, maybe g5, g4, f4, all depending on how Magnus plays. We have bishop to e2 by Magnus and knight to e4. Knight to a4, declining the trade and preparing to shift the knight over to c5, and Gukesh goes bishop to d6. We have pawn to f3, knight c5 right away is perfectly fine, but he decides to kick away the knight first, and knight f6, and now knight to c5, where you could easily eliminate the knight. There's no problem with that, but Gukesh goes queen to e7. And b4, as in any position, b4 is by far the best move. Magnus decides to prepare it. He goes knight d3, and only after rook c7 does he go pawn to b4. We have rook f to c8, and now pawn to b5, chasing away the knight, knight d8, and Magnus trades off a pair of rooks. Rook captures, and pawn to a4. Knight to f7 and pawn to a5. Preparing pawn to a6, Gukesh continues with his plan of attacking the king side, pawn to g5 and pawn to a6. And here Gukesh plays pawn to b6, spending some half a minute on this idea. And okay, Magnus is now 6.5 minutes, Gukesh something below 4 minutes on the clock. We have rook to c1. Gukesh offers a trade of rooks, and Magnus offers, and Gukesh should play something like pawn to h5 or king f8, but he goes for pawn to e5. And there is a problem with this move. I could show it to you, but also, you know, you could pause the video because it's very interesting. It's something that Gukesh missed, and you guys have a chance to outplay the world champion tactically here. So while I give you a couple of seconds, try to find the best continuation for Magnus. Yes, it is all about the f5 pawn that is now undefended. And, you know, it always comes back to what Josh Waitzkin was telling us all those years ago in the Chess Academy of Chess Master Grandmaster Edition. Always be mindful of the square left behind. And, okay, this is now the pawn left behind, but you know what I mean. it's rook captures on c7, or you can start with captures on e5. Both moves have to be included. Rook captures with queen captures on c7, d captures, knight captures, bishop captures, and now bishop to d3. This is the move that Gukesh missed, which is kind of ironic, as that is the move that Fabi missed against Gukesh. Gukesh's famous bishop d3 from the previous video. And you cannot defend. If you try to defend, then a simple queen b1 double attacks the pawn, and there's no way to add another defender. So pawn to f4 by Gukesh, and now e captures, g captures, and king to g2. And this is all there is to it. Magnus's king is just much safer, and on an open board, a bishop pair will be deadly. So there is no way to survive this. Even with the engine perfect play, I would say the white just wins this. So king to g7, we have king to e2 by Magnus, bishop to d4, and queen to e6. Very annoying having the white queen so deep in black's camp. Queen to d7 offering a queen trade, and now Magnus could even further improve with queen to c6, but he says that's not necessary. He goes bishop to f5, and Gukesh could now easily capture on b5, and this would maybe allow him some drawing chances, as bishop to f5 is not the most precise move, but Gukesh is now down to 20 seconds on the clock. And if such a position would occur, then you have this very interesting queen e7 check, king to h8, and okay, the knight defense here. So you're going to play bishop to e6 with the idea of queen to f8 check, followed by queen to g8 checkmate, and now you go queen e8. And you force a queen trade. Captures, and then bishop captures on d5. White is up in material, but maybe black can draw this. However, after bishop to f5, Gukesh decided to trade queens. Queen captures, bishop captures, and now Magnus is just winning if he plays precisely. We have bishop to e3, and of course Magnus plays precisely. Bishop to b4. It's easy to find the best move if you always think about the b4 square. Now the idea is bishop d6, bishop d8, you pick up the a7 pawn, and you promote the a pawn. That's it. So Gukesh has to find a way to stop that, but he also has a passed pawn. Pawn to d4. We have bishop to c4, stopping the pawn from going to d3, even though it's not necessary. The king is enough, but, Magnus also playing against Gukesh's time here. Knight to d7, guarding that b8 square, and Magnus continues with his plan. Bishop d6, we have captures, king to f6, stopping bishop to e6 to dislodge the knight, and pawn to f4. Now Magnus making room for his king to enter the game, but also for the bishop to maybe go around and challenge that knight. So pawn to h5, saying that, okay, if Magnus goes after my pawn, then I can claim the e6 square and maybe gain some advantage there. But Magnus says no, king f3. He just improves the position of his king. We have bishop to d2 and bishop to d5. We have bishop d1, trying to say, okay, maybe if you go here, I can pick up the g pawn, then push the h pawn. But Magnus goes for a very tricky idea. He plays bishop to c6, gives up the e6 square to Gukesh's king, king to e6, and now bishop to c7, threatening a very cheap idea, which if you play, some move, can we even play d3? Then the idea is you eliminate the knight and capture on b6, and that's it. Once the pawn is captured, or rather the bishop, then you're gonna go a7, and the a8 will be queen. So there's no way to stop that. So after bishop to c7, Gukesh spots it, of course, plays bishop to a5. But now pawn to f5 check. You cannot capture as the knight is hanging, so king to e7. And here Magnus just played king to e4, and he was in this position on move 48 that Gukesh Domaraju, world classical champion, resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. A few more moves can be played. The bishop cannot move, as you're going to capture here and then promote the a pawn. If you move this pawn, then the king captures it. This pawn cannot move. You can give one check, give up this pawn, then try to waste some moves with the knight, but still after king e4, let's say knight f6 check, king to f4, and that's it. You go to g5, you capture this pawn, there will be two connected pass pawns on the king side, and you win this however you want, or, any other idea is also perfectly fine. Whatever you play here as white is winning. Which brings us to the next game. Now Gukesh will have the white pieces, and it would be in his, best interest to win, because now you get 2 points for a win, and if Magnus wins another one against Gukesh, that's 4 points for only one match. That's insane. In the entire first day, Magnus got 3.5 points, and now if he wins 2 games against Gukesh, that's 4 more points. I mean, And then you go to day 3. If you lose 2 games in day 3, that's 6 points. So let's see what happened. This one, even shorter, but burning more time. You'll see what I mean by this. So now Gukesh has the white pieces, played pawn to e4. We have pawn to e5, knight f3, knight to c6, and bishop to c4. We have pawn to d6 and castles kingside. And okay, some sort of an Italian game where people usually just go bishop to e7 or bishop to g4, but Magnus plays a move that has never been played in top-level chess, and that is bishop to e6. And if you guys also want to learn some cool moves that were never played in serious games, first link in the description below, download Lotus Chess and learn some really awesome moves like bishop to e6 here. Okay, Gukesh says that is a really silly idea. I'm just going to capture that, mess up your pawn structure, and play pawn to c3, preparing to strike in the center with pawn to d4, and I have no idea what you're doing here. Okay, Magnus says knight to f6. We have rook to e1, and there are some low-level games where queen d7 or queen d8 were played, but here we have bishop e7, and it is now already, as of move 7, that we have a completely new game. Gukesh strikes in the center, pawn to d4, says, all right, I still have no idea what you're doing, and Magnus castles kingside. D captures on e5, knight captures, we have knight captures on e5, and d captures on e5. And this is where things get really, really interesting, because as you can see, Magnus's idea has confused Gukesh a little bit. Gukesh already burned almost 3 minutes off his clock, and now, instead of trading queens or moving the queen to e2, he spends almost 4 minutes playing knight to d2, which is the top move recommended by the engine, but investing so much time in a position like this, hardly a good idea. We have bishop to c5 by Magnus, and now knight to f3. In the end, Gukesh does offer a queen trade. Queen e2, if you already played knight to d2, also makes sense, but okay. You know, who am I and who are we to argue, you know, about moves that were played in a game between a former and the reigning world champion. Knight f3, we have queen captures on d1, rook captures, and knight captures on e4. We have bishop to e3, bishop captures, and pawn captures. And this is the resulting position. Magnus is up a pawn, but it's a double D pawn. Is it the weakness? Is it the strength? We have, well, we could say the greatest endgame player who ever lived to instruct us and give us a lesson in endgames. Or will the reigning world champion have something to say about that? Rook to f5. Magnus defends the pawn. Rook to d7. Gukesh activates the rook to the fullest, goes after the c7 pawn. As we say, evolves it into a pig. Rook to c8 defending, and now rook 8 to d1. Doubling up on the d file, we have knight c5, forcing the rook either to move or to trade on d8, and Gukesh trades off a pair of rooks. We have rook d8, rook captures with check. Rook to f8, and now Gukesh keeps a pair of rooks on the board. We have rook to d1, as the e-pawns are weak, so having the rooks on the board, you know, really helps out. If you can get that rook to e7, those pawns will be incredibly weak. Pawn to e4, as the e5 definitely is a target. Knight e5, sorry, not knight e5, knight e5, and now pawn to h5 by Magnus. Okay, what do you play here? Gukesh goes knight to d7, offers a trade of knights, and rook to f5. Magnus says, sure, but I want to trade on c5, so my rook is even more active. Knight captures, rook captures, and rook to d4, going after the pawn, and Magnus goes rook to d5. Says you can have the pawn. If you capture, I'm going rook d1, check rook d2, check rook captures on b2, captures on a2, and so on. And the only move for Gukesh is actually to allow that. You have to go that way, or you play rook b4, maybe go after b7 to offer some resistance. But Gukesh played pawn to c4. He says, all right, you capture, I'm going to capture, and then I'm going to play b4, a4, and I'm going to have 4 versus sort of 3 here. On the queen side, that should be very good for me. Magnus looked at this, he calculated for about maybe 30 seconds, and he said, nope, that's a blunder. And it really is a blunder. It loses the game. And the reason it loses the game, you know, I could ask you to pause the video and find it, but Magnus also didn't find it. So if you're up to the task, feel free to do it. I cannot stop you, but, you know, I would not encourage it. So this is what happened. Rook captures on d4. Magnus does get the rooks off the board. E captures king f7. Okay, both players activating the kings. King f2, king f6, king to f3. king to e3, king to f5, and now comes the move, pawn to b4. And what is the move that is winning in this position and that Magnus missed? You had to find it from that position where Magnus decided to trade rooks. But even if you find it in this position, okay, you do get some extra points. And that move is pawn to c6. And the reason for that is that you have to calculate all of the pawn moves, which is, of course, not very simple. And you have to put white in Zugzwang. And that is done by a4, g5, b5. You're going to play e5, and then after pawn to d5, c captures, and now you're going to play pawn to b6. White will play h3, you're going to play h4, and now just king to e2. And you might be thinking, well, okay, we forced the white king to move, but how are we playing king f4? We cannot allow the pawn to start marching forward. You're not planning to. You're going to go backwards. King f6, and then after king f3, king e7, and after king captures, you're going to play king to d6. And this is what you had to see in your mind when you decided to trade rooks. And then, of course, it's completely winning. Once you see this and once you see the blockaded position, you know that you're winning. Once you move, then you pick up the d5 pawn, and then you just push this pawn, go anywhere you want, pick up these pawns, advance the pawns, win the game easily. Magnus missed it. He played pawn to a6, which allowed Gukesh to get back into the game. He can still draw, but 10 seconds on the clock, he misses pawn to a4. Instead, he plays pawn to h4, which stops pawn to g5, but, it's impossible. I don't know what, I don't care what level you're playing at, whether it's at this level or at your level or at my level. Calculating pawns is really, difficult work. I've had so many positions where you have a king and pawn endgame, and you're like, yeah, I studied king and pawn endgame, so I'm not going to blunder here. And then the most important move, you just blunder. You move a pawn 1 square instead of 2 squares, and it's it's like terrible blunder. And then after the game, you're like, oh, but of course, yeah. But when you're calculating, you just see ghosts. So okay, Magnus finds it. Pawn to b5, only move that wins. But yeah. To Magnus, he spent some maybe 45 seconds here. We have pawn to c5, pawn to c6, pawn to g3, and pawn to e5, and he was in this position on move 32 that Gukesh Domaraju, world classical champion, resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. You could play a few more moves, but of course at this level it is not needed, because you can see that white simply runs out of moves very quickly. D captures, king captures, let's say pawn to a3, pawn to g6, and now you have to give up the pawn, something like king d2, king to d4, we have king to e2, and now e3, of course, king to e1, king d3, king d1, e2 check, king e1, king to e3, and this would be stalemate, but now white has a pawn move, and it doesn't matter that you're going to lose that pawn, you have to play something. Unfortunately, for the losing side in chess, it is impossible to skip a move. If it was possible to skip a move, you would never have stalemates. So b captures on a4, pawn to b5, let's say pawn to a3, b captures on a6, pawn to a2, pawn to a7, and now you can bring a queen, but also it's way cooler to win with a less valuable piece. So yeah, after pawn to e5, Gukesh resigns, and Magnus wins both of the games. So in a match, Magnus versus Gukesh, so far out of the 4 games, Magnus won 3, and 1 was a draw, which means absolutely nothing if Gukesh wins the 2 games tomorrow, which are pointed 3 points, or scored 3 points for a win. That will be 6 full points for Gukesh, so there's still time to come back from this. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Brilliant stuff from Magnus as usual. I know you guys want to see the other games being played, and I probably will show them, but I personally am most excited about the clash between Gukesh and Magnus, so I hope you don't mind. That is the one I'm always showing first. It's just the one that interests me the most. But yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank P.A. Bauer, Gerard St. Pierre, Brazos Valley Chess Society, Francesco Corradi, and Uzi Shale for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.